The reason hardworking employees don't get the recognition they deserve is because the system is unfair and rigged against you. But what most people don't realize is that doesn't mean you can't get it to work for you if you know how. And that's exactly what I'm going to show you in this video. A simple, repeatable system that got me from answering phones to making over $200,000 a year. And I didn't have to kiss anyone's ass, play politics, or sit online late every night to do it either. So what is this system? Well, if you want to get promoted consistently and faster than everyone else around you, there's one mistake you have to avoid. And it's one I see a lot of people make because it looks so much like common sense. So you see, promotions, they feel really random and unfair, right? And that's because there are so many things that you just can't control. You can't control your company. You can't control your boss. You can't control HR. The problem is you need all of them in order to get promoted, right? So the mistake that everyone makes is they think, well, because those things are random, then there's nothing I can do about it. And that thinking right there is the trap. Because if you actually know how to control the randomness, like I'm about to show you, then you can turn luck into engineered opportunities. And this will get you promoted more often and earning more over your career than everyone else who still thinks it's just about luck. So how do you beat that randomness? Well, the thing to understand about promotions is they're what's known as a complex adaptive system, which is just fancy talk for a system where a lot of different ingredients are like bouncing off each other in ways that make the end result appear random. But if you know how to influence those ingredients even slightly, you can get them to interact in more predictable and repeatable ways. And when that happens, promotions stop being about luck and instead they become inevitable. So if you want to massively improve your chances inside a company you can't fully control, then keep watching because I'm about to break down the 4 things that are in your control. And once you understand how to control just these 4, you'll start getting promoted even in environments where it feels like the company is actively working against you. So in order to understand what these 4 things are, we need to go somewhere that's going to sound a bit stupid at first, right? But just give me 60 seconds because it's going to completely rewire the way you think about promotions forever. So the thing to know is that promotions aren't the only thing that look random. There's in fact an entire industry that had the exact same problem and they solved it. And that industry is Hollywood. Because you can't spend $200 million on a movie and just hope that it does well, right? So studios needed a way to remove as much luck from the system as they could if they wanted to be profitable. And they actually figured out a system to do that. And I'll show you how to apply that system to your own career. Now, before you start commenting, of course there's exceptions. We can all list terrible movies that did really well or massive franchise movies that were a complete flop. But on the whole, studios win more than they lose because they follow this simple formula that reduces the randomness. And because the wins are repeatable, they can afford the occasional miss, which actually maps quite nicely to promotions because you won't ever get every single promotion you ever ask for, but using this system, you will massively increase your chances and get them far more consistently. Because when you understand how Hollywood do it, you'll finally see why your career has felt so random and how to make it predictable instead. Right, so let's look at what you can control. So movies have 4 levers that determine whether they succeed or fail, and your career is controlled by those exact same 4 levers. And the first one is quality. Now, this one's the obvious one. It's just, is the movie actually good? Or in your case, do you actually do your job well? And that part is in your control. I can't tell you how to do that. But in order to get promoted, then you need to actually be good at your job, and that's something you're going to have to figure out on your own. But this is where people get it wrong slightly because they think that that lever is the only lever they control. And then they do a really good job and wonder why they're not promoted. And when that happens, they double down and work even harder and try even more, and then that fails, and then they see someone less qualified like David get promoted before they do, and then they just give up and say it's all luck. And that's why quality is the least important of the things you can control, because the biggest influences on your career are the other 3 levers. And that second lever is awareness. Now, for movies, awareness is just how many people even know the film exists, because that's why studios spend tens of $millions on trailers and interviews and billboards, because A really, really good movie that no one hears about is gonna commercially fail. And that's exactly the same for you. If the right people inside your company don't even know you exist, then it doesn't matter how good you are at your job, the promotion never happens. But just like Hollywood, you can advertise yourself so people discover you. And I'll show you the most effective way to do that in a moment. And don't worry, you're not going to have to kiss anyone's ass to do it either. Which brings us on to the third lever, perception. Because even if people know the movie exists, they actually have to understand what that movie is. And the movie John Carter is a really good example of this. It had this enormous budget, a huge marketing campaign, so everyone heard about it, but no one really understood what the film was about. Is it a Western or fantasy? I actually didn't even know it was a sci-fi until I made this video. I thought it was like Conan the Barbarian or something. I mean, look at this image right here and tell me that doesn't look like a sword and sorcery old school fantasy movie, not a sci-fi action film, right? And I'm not alone in being confused by this. A lot of people didn't get it, and so they didn't go and see it. Which is why awareness without perception is useless, because if the right people at work don't understand your skills properly, then you're not going to get promoted. Which brings us to the final lever, which is timing. Because you could make the greatest film ever, but if you release it the exact same week as Avengers Endgame, then you won't stand a chance. And it's the same in any company. There are certain windows where getting promoted is almost impossible, but what a lot of people don't realize is there are also these weird little windows where getting a yes is way easier, and I'll tell you exactly what those windows are in a moment. But now that you've seen all four levers, the next question becomes, well, how do you actually use them? And getting this part right is so important because if you just take one of those levers and pull it in isolation, you can accidentally make the other three worse, which means unless you understand all levers and how they interact, you might be sabotaging yourself without realizing it. And trust me, I've seen this 1,000 times. Someone boosts their perception, but the timing is all wrong, and then they end up burning all the goodwill they had to build up, and then they've got to start the entire thing all over again. So if you want these levers to actually move you upwards rather than sideways or backwards, you've got to learn how to use each one in a way that supports the other, and that's exactly what I'm about to show you. And if you want to make this even easier for yourself, you can get the free frameworks and templates from the Promotion Playbook in the description below. So let's start with quality, because this is the most obvious one, and honestly, as I said earlier, it's the least impactful. And this is just getting good at your job. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you how to do your job. I trust that you're doing it very well, and you already know how hard you're working, and if all it took was doing good work consistently, then you wouldn't even be here watching this video. Which is why if you want to escape the constant grind and being overlooked, then the next three levers become where the leverage actually is. Which brings us on to how to control your awareness. All right, so let's talk about something no one ever really explains properly, which is how do you actually advertise yourself at work without sounding like you're campaigning for office president or kissing anyone's ass? Well, most people think it's about sharing wins in meetings or loading up your performance review with all the achievements you've done over the year. But if that's all you're doing, then you're basically just hoping someone happens to notice. And hope is not really a great strategy. So let me show you a better way. So you know how Hollywood advertise a movie? They have the main trailer, yes, but then there's the leads doing interviews, they do podcast appearances, the cast do viral TikTok dances, there's behind the scenes photos and leaks, and all of that stuff builds awareness. The trailer is just one part of it. And why this matters is because advertising yourself doesn't mean the big show and tell moments like your performance reviews and official project updates. It means all the stuff around it. So every conversation, every email, every online meeting is all an opportunity to show people what you're working on and what you're good at. And as I'm about to show you, you don't need to sell yourself to do it. You just need to frame your work like it matters. So here's the simplest way to advertise yourself, and it's one I use all the time. So anytime you write a message or an email or give someone some kind of update, you just have to think to yourself, context, outcome, avoid. And let me show you what they mean. Say you've just finished a project improving the onboarding process. When it comes up in the everyday conversations, most people would say something like, the project has been complete, the onboarding process has been updated, which is very accurate, but it's also really forgettable. And that isn't an advert, it's just a statement. To transform this into an advert for yourself, try saying this instead. I improved the onboarding efficiency so new hires can ramp up faster without pulling hours away from senior team leads. And straight away, you can feel the difference, right? You gave it the context, so the onboarding part, the outcome, which is the faster ramp up speed, and importantly, what you helped it avoid in the business world, which is stealing time from the leads. Now your work reads like something that created value and not just a completed task. And when you do this consistently over time, you're going to be advertising yourself to everyone. And if you want a complete personal advertising strategy, I break that down properly in phase 3 of the promotion playbook. But now here's the problem with visibility. Even if people are aware of you, if they don't have the right perception of you, it still doesn't convert into a promotion. So here's the next lever, and it's one where almost everyone give up because it's going to take the most amount of work. So let's talk about perception, because this is the one almost everyone thinks they understand, and yet it's the one almost everyone is doing wrong, because most people don't realize this, but every single skill you have at work sits on a spectrum. So you've got positive to negative, and this means how people are interpreting your skills as either a good or a bad thing. And unless you get this right, something you genuinely believe is one of your strengths could actually be the exact reason people don't see you as promotable, because they're interpreting your biggest strength as something negative. And this is because perception doesn't care what you think you are. Perception is all about what they think you are. And let me show you how this works visually. So take being detail oriented. Let's pretend you're very detail oriented, and this is a skill you're trying to advertise to people at work. What you've got to ask yourself is, what version of this skill are you advertising? The positive or the negative? On the positive side, this looks like quality. It looks like you're taking care of all the details and you have high standards. It looks like someone who's going to protect the business from stupid mistakes. But on the negative side, this same skill looks like someone who is a blocker. It becomes someone who makes everything slower because you're not detail oriented, you're someone who needs everything perfect before they can even move. So you could be sat there thinking you're being really thorough and having high standards, but everyone else thinks you're slowing everything down. And this is where you're like the John Carter movie. You think you're advertising a sci-fi, but everyone else sees a high fantasy barbarian movie, which is why perception is the highest leverage lever. Leverage lever. Because if you don't get this one right, every other lever becomes pointless. But how do you make sure you're giving out the right version of your skills? Well, there's something really simple that I use, and it's called the 2 T's. And once you understand the 2 T's, you'll instantly know whether you're signaling the promotable version of your skill or the version that's going to get you put in the not yet bucket. The first T of the 2 T's is trait, and that's the skill you're trying to demonstrate. And the second T is the one that changes how you're perceived, and it's trajectory. Trajectory means the version of the skill that matters to the people who are going to decide if you get promoted. So you always want to be signaling that version of it. And to do that, you don't just advertise that you have the skill. For example, I'm very detail oriented. You need to sell the benefit of you having that skill. So if we look at detail oriented again, if you advertise yourself as, I'm very detail oriented, so I checked this report, then depending on who hears that, it could actually make you look like the blocker. But instead, if you sell the benefit by saying, hey, you can trust this report, I ensured that all the details are accurate, then that's the trajectory version, because you're not bragging about being detail oriented, you're signaling the value that being detail oriented creates. So that's the key. You don't advertise the trait, you advertise what the trait does. So whenever I'm communicating at work, I always think the 2 T's. What is the trait I want to advertise? And then what is the benefit of that trait? And then I just say that. Because the people who get promoted don't just look competent now, they communicate the skills like the person who's going to solve the problems in the role that they're trying to get. And once you start signaling your skills in that way, that's when you're ready for the final lever, which is timing. Because even if you totally nail quality, visibility, and perception, if you choose the wrong moment, the answer's still going to be no. Or if you pick the right timing, you're going to make the yes so much easier. So let's talk about timing. Now, most people already kind of understand the bad timing. times when asking for a promotion is going to get you a no. For example, when there's no headcount budget, when the company is freezing any sort of moves before the end of the year, when the board is blocking everything. And obviously, those are really terrible times to try and get promoted. But what people don't realize is there are also these timings where getting promoted is actually a lot easier. And as I'm about to show you, these windows show up a lot more often than you might think if you know how to spot them. So in order to spot the good timing, you need to be on the lookout for one thing, and that thing is change. So when a new leader comes in, when a department merges or splits, when the business shifts strategy suddenly, these are all moments where the rules and the process kind of softens a bit. Because these are all moments where exceptions get made. In other words, these are all moments where that's not possible suddenly becomes maybe, actually, yes. But you don't just have to be able to spot them, you actually need to be able to use them in ways that make the yes easier. So if you ask your boss for a promotion, they might say something like, sorry, there's no headcount budget right now, maybe let's revisit this next year. And they say that because in order to get you promoted at that time, even if they wanted to, they'd have to get a special exception, approvals, they need to get it allocated to their budget, and this is going to require sign-offs from senior people in HR, from people in finance, from their boss's boss's boss, and all of this is going to require business cases and justification and sponsorship, and what I'm saying is it's really difficult. But what if you could bypass all of that? Well, that's what these windows are for, because if you ask when the headcount budget is being allocated for the year, then all of those barriers disappear because that's the time when it's normal to ask for more budget. So it becomes far easier because instead of getting exception, getting budget is just the process. And if you've already been advertising yourself with the right perception, then timing your ask around these moments doesn't just increase your chances, it will completely remove the resistance. But not every change moment is going to help you. Some will trap you even harder, and it all comes down to one thing that most people never check, which is the structure of the department that you're in and where you sit inside it. And unless you understand how the structure you're sitting in can impact your promotion chances, then you're not going to know whether you're lining yourself up for a yes or running straight into a brick wall at full speed. So if you want to find out whether your department is even promotable or whether you're just stuck in what I call a career silo, then that's what I break down in this next video. So go and watch that next, because if you're in a silo, then none of these levers we've just covered will matter until you escape it first.